The swampy forest should have breathed at dawn. It should have exhaled its mist in slow white ribbons rising from the cold black water, should have carried the smells of wet bark, rotting leaves, and the soft bubbling of life beneath the surface. But this morning, nothing rose. No mist, no steam, no breath. The water lay flat and glossy like an obsidian mirror stretched between drowned tree trunks. Not a ripple broke its surface. Not a sound stirred from beneath. The forest was submerged, suffocated, and still. A massive bull moose named Carson stood knee-deep in the flood, his fur dripping with stagnant water. His huge palmate antlers, heavy with velvet scars from the previous season, brushed against dead branches as he moved. The forest had always been his refuge, the place where he foraged in the cold seasons and hid from wolves in the warm ones. But now the water covered everything. Trails, saplings, grass beds, salt licks, all swallowed by a flood that refused to evaporate. Carson lowered his head and sniffed the water. It smelled wrong. Too still. Too warm for the early morning. Too metallic. He stepped forward, hooves sinking into silt that should have been solid ground. The mud pulled at him in strange pockets, as if the forest floor had become a soaked sponge that no longer remembered how to hold shape. A crow perched on a dead pine cawed once. A short, uneasy sound, then fell silent. Even the birds felt it. Carson waded deeper. The forest around him leaned like a drowning creature, trunks half submerged, bark sloughing off in strips, roots exposed and pale. Water levels should have dropped weeks ago, letting the swamp breathe and the soil dry, releasing the morning mist. But the mist did not rise. Instead, low fog hung trapped near the tree line, refusing to climb, refusing to lift. It felt heavy, as if held down by the pressure of the water below. Carson shook his antlers, sending droplets flying. He listened. Nothing. No frogs, no beavers, no insects. A drowned forest is a quiet forest, but this quiet felt unnatural. He moved toward an old feeding ground on higher land. His legs churned through thick water, and each step sent dull vibrations through the flood. On the far side of the swamp, a pair of headlights flickered through trees. A truck. Then voices. Human. Carson froze. Two wildlife researchers, Maya and her assistant Jonah, stepped carefully from the vehicle, testing the ground with long poles. They wore chest waders and carried equipment bags slung across their shoulders. Jonah scanned the swamp. "It's higher again." Maya nodded grimly. "Another 6 centimeters overnight. That doesn't make sense. No rain, no meltwater, no inflow." "But the water isn't leaving," she said. "The soil's sealed, completely saturated." Jonah frowned. "But why would the mist stop rising?" Maya raised her pole and dipped it into the water. She watched the ripples. There were none. The water accepted the pole silently, without resistance. Maya whispered, "Because the water isn't cooling at the surface. Something is heating it from below." Carson lifted his head. He didn't understand their words, but he understood tone, concern, urgency, fear. He waded backward slowly, avoiding the humans. The forest groaned softly as trunks shifted under the weight of the standing flood. Somewhere in the distance, a large splash echoed. Not a fish, but something heavy dislodging beneath the water. Jonah jumped. What was that? Maya's eyes narrowed. A root system collapsing. The soil structure is giving out. Carson turned toward the sound, ears rotating sharply. He saw it before they did. A cluster of aspen trees suddenly leaned at an unnatural angle. The water bulged upward around their bases, rising, forming a dome, then burst outward in a surge of black water and mud. The ground beneath those trees sank. A slow, wet collapse. Maya shouted, "Back! Back now!" The humans stumbled away from the shoreline. Carson stepped deeper into the forest, instinctively seeking higher ground. But every direction showed the same signs. Water swelling where it shouldn't, roots groaning under pressure. The forest wasn't drowning, it was filling from below. Something beneath the earth was forcing water upward. Carson moved toward a familiar ridge, the last dry strip for kilometers. As he approached, he saw movement on the slope. A frightened red fox, soaked and shivering, trying to climb but slipping back down the muddy incline. Carson approached slowly. The fox froze. For a moment, prey and giant herbivore regarded each other in mutual panic. Carson stepped to the side, giving the fox room to climb. It darted past him, scrambling into safety. Behind him, Maya and Jonah climbed onto a fallen log for elevation. Maya held her breath. "Jonah, look!" The entire middle of the swamp began to tremble, tiny vibrations spreading across the surface like shivers. Jonah whispered, "It's rising." The water surface bulged upward again, this time much larger, the size of a small hill. It quivered under its own pressure as if something beneath was pushing with enormous force. Maya's eyes widened. "It's groundwater, being forced upward through fractured layers." "But what fractured them?" She didn't answer immediately. She stared toward the horizon. A long pipeline, half hidden by trees, ran along the forest edge, newly installed, bright metal against old wood. Industry had crept closer in recent years. Gas extraction, deep drilling, hydraulic pressure testing. Jonah followed her gaze. "You think the company ruptured the aquifer? I think they drained parts of it, and overpressurized others. And the forest is sitting on a rising bubble of trapped water." Carson reached the ridge. His heavy breaths fogged the cold air, though the mist still refused to rise around him. The water behind him trembled ominously. Another bulge, a groan, a long wet crack as a section of forest floor tore open. A dead spruce tipped, its roots peeling free like wet ropes. Carson stepped higher. His hooves found firmer ground, but only barely. Jonah pointed. "The moose is climbing out." "Smart," Maya said. "Animals feel what we can't." Carson looked back at the drowned forest, his ears twitching to every vibration. The water pulsed, the trees moaned, the forest floor sank in slow waves. It wasn't a flood, it was a failure. A geological failure created by human imbalance, and somewhere beneath the roots, the trapped pressure was still rising. The mist that should have risen with dawn still lay flat across the water, refusing to move. It was waiting. The forest was holding its breath, and Carson felt the moment when that breath was about to break. The ridge beneath Carson's hooves trembled again, subtly but with intention, as if the ground were whispering warnings that even he struggled to interpret. His ears swiveled in every direction. Behind him, the drowned forest groaned under the pressure of water it never asked to carry. A bubble the size of a small cabin rose beneath the swamp surface, lifting dead trunks like brittle sticks. The water around it quivered, then settled back into unnatural stillness. Jonah swallowed. "That looked alive." Maya shook her head. "Not alive. Pressurized. The aquifer is pushing against the impermeable clay. It's looking for any way out." Carson didn't understand geology, but he understood danger far older than words. His breath steamed in the cold morning air, but the mist around him still refused to rise, pinned to the water like a trapped spirit. He stepped farther up the ridge. The boy fox who'd fled earlier, thin from hunger, its fur patchy from wet cold, watched him from a hollow stump. It trembled, ears flat, eyes wide. Carson ignored it. Prey and predator didn't matter in a dying forest. What mattered was staying ahead of the water. A sound broke the silence. Not a splash, not a crack, a rhythmic thudding, mechanical, distant, relentless. Maya snapped her head toward the sound. "Pump station," she whispered. "They didn't stop it." Her jaw clenched. "We emailed, called, filed reports. They said pressure tests were within normal limits." Jonah's eyes widened. "Normal limits don't cause this. In the distance, faint plumes of steam rose from behind the tree line where the gas extraction company had installed pressure regulators, plumes that should never have been there. Something hissed beneath the swamp. Carson froze mid-step. The water ahead of him dimpled inward, as though inhaling, pulling from below, swallowing unseen spaces. Then, a burst of bubbles erupted in a violent column. Dead fish bodies surfaced, spinning like coins tossed from a pocket. Maya covered her mouth. God! The stench hit them seconds later. Sour, metallic, rotting, the smell of anaerobic pockets ripped open. Carson recoiled, backing several steps up the ridge. His hind leg struck a brittle root, snapping it loudly. The forest reacted. A wave of tremors passed beneath the water, rippling outward in rings that lapped silently against flooded trunks. The movement wasn't large, but the forest didn't need large. It needed enough. The great dome of water near the center began to rise, slowly, purposefully, with pressure behind it. Jonah whispered, "That's not a bubble." Maya looked sick. "That's the aquifer breaching." The dome grew taller, stretching the flood skin like a drum. Logs shifted, mud churned. The waterline around the trees sank slightly as displacement increased. Then the world seemed to hold its breath. Carson stomped once, a defensive reaction. The dome collapsed outward in a blast of black water, mud, and decomposing gases. The explosion threw debris in every direction. A drowned birch snapped in half like a twig. A wave surged toward the ridge. "Move!" Maya shouted. Carson didn't need translation. He lunged uphill. Jonah and Maya scrambled onto a boulder outcrop, gripping exposed roots as a plume of swamp water thrashed past them. For a moment, it was chaos. Water surging, trees tilting, earth groaning. Then it settled again. Silent. Waiting. The mist still didn't rise. Carson breathed heavily, sides heaving. He scanned the forest. The explosion had opened a massive crater in the swamp, revealing a pit of exposed clay and black muck. Water trickled into it, hissing as hot groundwater hit cold surface pools. Jonah's voice trembled. "How much worse can it get?" Maya didn't answer. She climbed onto a fallen trunk, trying to get a clearer view. Her boots slipped, she steadied herself and raised her binoculars. The pump station lights blinked in the distance. "This entire floodplain," she said quietly, "sits on fractured clay. If pressure keeps rising, the water won't stop here. It'll break upstream. It'll wipe out the entire drainage corridor." "And the town?" Jonah asked. "Flooded," Maya whispered. "And contaminated." Carson flicked his ears toward a new sound, a faint, desperate cry. He turned toward the source. A young moose calf, scrawny from hunger, fur dripping, struggled knee-deep in mud near a fallen spruce. It had been trapped by the earlier surge of water. Its eyes darted wildly, bleating for help. Carson stared. He was not its father, not its kin. But in the wild, a bull moose rarely abandoned a calf in obvious distress, not out of compassion, but out of instinctual recognition. A collapsing forest eats the weak first. He stepped down the ridge, hooves gripping soil that threatened to crumble. His heavy breathing echoed through hollow trunks. The calf cried louder. Maya gasped. "Oh no! Jonah, look! The moose is going toward it." "Should we help?" Jonah asked. "We can't reach them," Maya said, shaking her head. "But if he can pull it out—" Carson reached the calf, lowering his massive head. He nudged it with the flat of his antler, not to harm, but to lift. The calf wobbled, slipped, nearly fell, then regained footing. Carson stepped sideways, blocking the unstable mud pocket with his own weight. The ground sagged under him, but he held. The calf scrambled uphill, climbing toward the ridge. Then Carson felt it. A deep, subtle vibration. Stronger than before, angrier. He backed up just as the mud pocket collapsed, tearing open like a mouth. A cavern of black water seethed below. Jonah shouted, "The ground's hollow!" Maya grabbed his arm. "Up! Higher!" Carson climbed the ridge as the collapse widened. devouring dead trees whole. The calf pressed against his side, shaking violently. The drowned forest was sinking, not uniformly, but in patches, pockets, bursts, and the aquifer beneath kept rising. The mist trembled at the surface, quivering like something alive, but still refusing to rise. Maya whispered, horrified, "It's too warm. The water's too warm. The mist can't rise because the surface temperature is wrong." Jonah stared. "So the forest is cooking?" Maya nodded, pale. "From below." Another tremor rolled through the swamp. Deeper, longer, a warning the land could not speak aloud. Carson pressed the calf behind him, ears pinned back, muscles tense. For the first time in decades, the drowned forest was preparing to break. And when it did, nothing within its boundaries would be safe. Not the animals, not the humans, not the earth itself. The mist refused to rise because it was waiting for the explosion that would tear the forest open.